The snow had been falling since 4 in the afternoon. By midnight, it had stopped being weather and become something else entirely. A presence, a pressure. The kind of cold that doesn't just sit on the land but presses down into it, as if February in Wyoming had decided this year to be remembered. Highway 16 ran through Black Hollow like a scar the county had given up trying to heal white from shoulder to shoulder. The lane markings buried somewhere beneath 6 inches of packed powder that the plows hadn't touched since Tuesday because the plows in Black Hollow ran on a budget that assumed February would show some restraint. Black Hollow, Wyoming. Population not enough to matter. One gas station with 2 pumps, one of which had been out of service since the previous administration. A motel called the Sunrise that had not seen a sunrise worth the name in at least a decade. Its vacancy sign missing 2 letters, so it read something that wasn't a word in any language. A Baptist church with a cross that had been leaning since a windstorm 3 years prior and had achieved in its slow decline a kind of unintentional honesty that the congregation had decided to interpret as a feature. And Black Hollow Diner, which was the only establishment in a 30-mile radius that kept its lights burning past 10 o'clock at night, not out of ambition or optimism, but because Donna Briggs had watched too many long-haul truckers leave her parking lot with their eyes already closing, and she carried the weight of that knowledge. The way people carry things, they can never put down quietly, constantly, without ever setting it on the table and naming it. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease and something that might have been pie 2 days ago. The kind of smell that soaks into the walls over decades until the smell and the walls become the same thing. The neon signs in the window buzzed behind frost-fogged glass. The jukebox in the corner was playing Merle Haggard on a loop because 2 of the selection buttons had stuck sometime in the 90s, and nobody had found a reason compelling enough to fix them. Outside 77 Harley-Davidson motorcycles occupied the parking lot in a formation that was not quite military, but carried the memory of that kind of order. Snow had settled on the chrome and the leather seats, and the handlebars dusting everything in white, the way ash settles after something has burned, and the engines were cooling in the dark with soft metallic sounds. Small contractions of metal returning to the temperature of the world around it. The Iron Saints Motorcycle Club had been running through Black Hollow on the second Saturday of February for 11 years. Same route, same night. Same reason nobody in town ever asked them why. Because Black Hollow was small enough and old enough to understand that some things people do in February are not about February. The club took up every table on the east side of the diner. 40-some men inside and the rest arranged across the parking lot in the 2 booths nearest the door. Big men and quiet men and men who had learned that those 2 qualities were not opposites, that size and silence could occupy the same body without contradiction. Cole Raines sat at the largest table, which was technically round, but which everyone in the room understood to have a head, and that head was wherever Cole happened to be sitting. He was 43 years old, built the way men are built, who have spent 2 decades using their bodies as instruments of work and will rather than as objects of care. His beard was 2 weeks past trimmed. His eyes were the gray-black color of old asphalt in the moment after rain, when the surface is wet enough to reflect the sky, but not quite wet enough to be a mirror. The Iron Saints patch on the back of his cut was faded at the edges, the way things fade when they stop being clothing and start being a second skin worn through years, until the distinction between the object and the person wearing it becomes something you'd have to think hard to articulate. He was not talking. He was working on his third coffee of the night and watching the snow through the window the way men watch things they cannot control and cannot stop studying. In Iraq in 2004 and 2005, and the 6 months of 2006 before a roadside event outside Ramadi rearranged several things about the way he processed sound, Cole had developed the habit of watching the perimeter. Not because anything was always coming, because something was always possibly coming. And the difference between those 2 states was something you had to be awake for. He had brought that habit home. It had found new applications. Beside him, Dax Mercer was telling a story about a carburetor failure outside Billings that had stranded him for 4 hours in the company of a gas station attendant who believed earnestly in the spiritual significance of prime numbers. Nobody at the table was fully listening. Everyone was glad to have the sound. Dax was the club's road captain, 38 years old, left-handed. With a scar under his left jaw from a bar disagreement, he never discussed in detail in a way of occupying rooms that made them feel less tense without making them feel less serious. He was the kind of man who made things easier by being present without being soft about it. Donna Briggs moved between the tables with the coffee carafe the way she had moved through every late night in this diner for 19 years efficiently without theater, with the particular grace of someone whose competence had long since stopped requiring attention to itself. She was 51. She had raised 2 boys in this town and buried a husband and outlasted 3 economic downturns in 1 flood. And she had done all of it without leaving Black Hollow, which was either stubbornness or love, or the specific thing that forms when those 2 qualities calcify together over long enough time. The other occupied tables held what passed for late-night Black Hollow humanity. 3 long-haul truckers in Carhartt jackets who were at various stages of falling asleep over their coffee. A man in a canvas coat sleeping against the window with his mouth open and his boots still damp from the parking lot. 2 women in hospital scrubs who had the exhausted posture of people running on spite and vending machine calories because they'd been running since yesterday and the day before that and didn't remember what the alternative felt like. Nobody at any of the civilian tables made extended eye contact with the Iron Saints. Not out of fear exactly, though fear was part of it for some of them, but out of the shared understanding that some people occupy a different register of reality and that mixing registers without cause is a form of poor judgment. The bikers were not unfriendly, they were not approachable. Those were different conditions, and the diner understood the difference. That understanding held exactly until the door opened. The cold came in first, a hard, flat slap of February that made every head in the building turn by instinct, the way animals turn towards sudden stimulus before the brain has finished deciding whether it's relevant. Then the snow came in sideways through the gap, a brief and violent diagonal. Then the door widened further, and the boy walked in. He was small in the way that 6-year-olds are small, which is to say completely in every dimension, scaled to a version of the world that the adults in the room had stopped being able to access. He was wearing a gray hoodie that was 3 sizes too large. It swallowed his shoulders and fell past his hips, and the sleeves had been pushed up to his elbows in a way that suggested this was not the first time he'd worn it, and he had developed systems for managing its excess. His sneakers were canvas thin-soled, the kind of shoes that had no business on any human foot in winter Wyoming. One lace had broken and been knotted back together in the middle, a small pragmatic repair that said something about the circumstances in which the break had occurred. His cheeks were windburned to a raw red. The skin around his nose was cracked from cold. His dark hair was wet with snow that had not yet melted because his body temperature had dropped far enough that it could not produce the heat required. He stood inside the doorway for a moment with both fists clenched at his sides. It would have been easy to read this as fear. It was something more specific than fear. It was the posture of a child who had rehearsed coming through this door and was now in the moment of checking whether the rehearsal had prepared him adequately for the real thing. He was conducting a brief internal audit, deciding the audit passed, and then he walked. He walked across the full width of the diner directly toward the biker tables, and nobody moved to intercept him. Not the truckers, not Donna, not the nurses, who had looked up from their phones with the alertness of medical professionals in the presence of a child who might need medical attention. Nobody moved because there was something in the way he moved that foreclosed intervention. Not aggression, not obliviousness. Something more like purpose that had been compacted down to its absolute minimum and was now all that was left, no room in it for fear, no room for hesitation, just the remaining core of a decision that had already been made before he crossed the parking lot. He stopped at Colerain's table. He opened his right fist. Coins tumbled onto the scarred wood with a sound like small confessions falling. Quarters and dimes and nickels and pennies rolling in different directions, settling into the grooves of a table that had absorbed decades of coffee rings and elbows and late-night arguments. Some coins rolled to the edge and stopped. Some lay flat immediately. The penny closest to Cole landed face up, Lincoln looking at the ceiling. The jukebox finished its song, clicked, did not begin another. The diner did not merely go quiet. It went still in a way that is different from quiet, the way a room goes still when everyone in it has simultaneously decided without coordination to stop contributing to the ambient sound of human presence. The boy looked at Cole. Cole looked at the coins. And then Cole looked at the boy's left wrist. There was a hospital bracelet there. White plastic, the standard issue kind, the kind that hospital intake departments print with the patient's information and snap around the wrist, and which patients often forget they're wearing until they see someone noticing it. The bracelet was sized for an adult and had been pushed up the boy's forearm where it sat loosely, the printed information facing outward. Cole could read the name from 3 feet away. Harper. The word did not arrive in his mind the way words usually arrived. It arrived the way a physical impact arrives, not processed and interpreted, but simply felt a force encountering a surface and transferring into it. Because Cole Raines had been in Ramadi when things went wrong, and he had learned in the years afterward how to carry weight that most people don't have to carry, and he had believed in the way that people believe things. They need to be true in order to continue functioning. That he had become reasonably good at that. He had not been prepared for this. Caleb Harper had been 31 years old when they put him in the ground in a field outside Casper, Wyoming, on a Tuesday in November 7 years ago. With the sky doing that thing Wyoming skies do in November, where they go so flat and gray that the horizon disappears and the land and the air become one continuous thing without definition. Cole had stood at that grave and held Caleb's hand in the 2 minutes before the end and received a request that he had said yes to without hesitation. Because you don't hesitate when a dying man asks you something and he is looking at you the way Caleb had looked at him. Find them. If something happens to me, promise me you'll find them. Cole had promised. And then life had done what life does, which is continue, and the trail had gone cold in ways that Cole told himself were legitimate obstacles rather than failures of will. And 7 years had accumulated the way debt accumulates when you stop looking at the statements, and the name Harper had become something he carried in the specific compartment he kept, things he hadn't finished accounting for. And now the name was standing in front of him on a white plastic bracelet on the wrist of a 6-year-old boy who had walked half a mile through a February blizzard in canvas sneakers. The boy said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, not from shyness, from the exhaustion of a body that had spent everything it had on getting here and had nothing left for volume. I have $1.37. Is that enough for soup? Nobody in the diner spoke. Cole picked up the coins slowly. He counted them with his thumb one by one, moving them from one side of his palm to the other. Not because he needed to verify the amount, because his hands needed something to do while the rest of him worked to stay level. The coins were cold from being in the boy's pocket, which was thin fabric, and had not kept them warm, which meant the boy had been out in this weather long enough for the heat transfer to complete. $1.37. Yeah, Cole said. His voice came out quieter than he'd intended. That's enough. He looked at Donna across the diner. She was already moving toward the kitchen. She had the expression of a woman who has seen enough of the world to know when something needs doing before anyone says a word about it, and she did not slow down or pause or look back to confirm the instruction because no instruction had been given and none was needed. The boy didn't sit down. He stood at the edge of the table with his arms at his sides watching Cole, the way that animals watch things that could either hurt them or help them and haven't decided which yet. His expression was not fearful. It was evaluative. He was reading Cole the way Cole had spent 43 years reading rooms and people and situations, and the sophistication of the process in a face that Young produced in Cole, a feeling he couldn't quickly name. What's your name? Cole asked. Eli. Eli what? A pause, less than a second, but Cole caught it, the brief internal calculation, the flicker behind the eyes of a child deciding something. Harper, the boy said. Eli Harper. Dax Mercer beside Cole stopped talking about prime numbers and carburetors. He did not say anything. He looked at his coffee cup. Cole did not look at Dax because Cole knew what Dax's face would show, and he didn't need that right now. You walk here, Eli. From the motel. The Sunrise. A nod. The Sunrise Motel was half a mile up Highway 16, a half mile in a February blizzard in canvas sneakers with a broken lace repaired with a knot at what Cole calculated was close to midnight. He did not let what he felt about that information show in his face because the boy was still evaluating him, and Cole understood in the way he understood things about people under pressure that this child needed him to be steady. "Your mom at the motel?" Cole asked. Something crossed Eli's face. Quick controlled the micro-expression of a child who has learned to manage what his face does because he has been in situations where managing it mattered. "She's sick," he said. "She told me to stay, but she couldn't get up to get food and I—" He stopped, looked at the coins on the table. "I just needed soup for her." The sentence was the simplest thing in the room and also the largest. The word just doing more work than a word that size should have to do, compressing into itself all the distance he had walked and all the cold he had walked through, and all the reasons why a 6-year-old boy in Wyoming at midnight had decided that the solution to his mother being too sick to feed herself was to count out every coin he could find and walk half a mile in a blizzard to a building full of strangers. Donna appeared in this kitchen doorway. She had the expression of a woman who had made a decision, and the decision was not up for discussion. "Sit down, baby," she said to Eli in the voice that doesn't ask questions, that just makes space where space is needed. "I've got chicken soup on the stove. Been going since 6. You're going to eat too." Eli sat. The men around the table shifted, not dramatically, not with any discussion, but with the small collective adjustments of people who understand that a space needs to change its character without anyone announcing that it's changing. Someone slid a glass of water toward the boy. Rex Toland at the far end of the table reached over and turned the jukebox volume down without being asked, which required him to stand and lean across 2 men, which he did without comment. The ambient sound of the room softened by degrees. Cole stacked the coins neatly at the corner of the table and left his hand there palm flat. He was watching Eli drink the water when the door opened again. This cold was different. Weather has one temperature. What came in with Deputy Voss Hargett had a different quality, the chill that accompanies authority that knows it's being watched and has decided to enjoy it. Hargett was 35, broad-shouldered with the maintained physical condition of a man who understood that his body was a professional instrument and treated it accordingly. His uniform was pressed even at this hour, which was not an accident. His hat was in his hand, a gesture calibrated to read as casual deference that was somehow more confident than if he'd walked in with his hand on his service weapon. He had a smile that was architecturally impressive, a smile that had been built to perform warmth while transmitting something else entirely. And his eyes, when they moved through the room, were conducting the same kind of rapid environmental assessment that Cole had been doing for decades, which told Cole something about the kind of training Hargett had sought out and the kind of situations he had decided to prepare for. The eyes went to Eli first, then to the biker table. The smile did not change. That was the tell. A person walking into a room containing 70-something Iron Saints at midnight should register something: respect, unease, the basic calibration response of a human animal reading a space correctly. Hargett's smile held its exact position, which meant he had already run the calculation and arrived at an answer he was comfortable with, and the comfort was not the comfort of someone being brave. It was the comfort of someone who had decided that the variables in this room did not change his outcome. He walked toward Eli with the practiced ease of a man who had done this before, had gotten small and appeared approachable, and positioned himself as the reasonable authority in the room. He crouched to the boy's level, a gesture Cole had seen deployed by people who were very good at appearing to be different from what they were. "There you are, buddy," Hargett said. His voice was warm, textured with genuine-sounding relief. "Your mom's been worried." Eli's spoon stopped moving. It was a small thing. The spoon was midway between the bowl and his mouth, and it simply stopped, and Eli did not put it down and did not complete the motion he just stopped. And Cole watched Eli's shoulders move the involuntary elevation the neck shortening by a fraction. The ancient and automatic physical language of threat at proximity, and understood with the cold clarity of a man who had learned to read bodies in environments where misreading them had terminal consequences. That whatever Deputy Voss Hargett was to this boy, he was not the person this boy needed to see. Hargett stood up and looked at Cole with the smile still in place. I appreciate you folks keeping an eye on him. Kid wandered off. You know how they get. He walked here, Cole said, from the sunrise, half-mile, in this weather. Like I said. Hargett spread his hands, a gesture of reasonable shared understanding between adults. Kids. His mother's sick, Cole said. I know, I've been helping her out. A slight emphasis on helping, the kind of emphasis that was designed to land as reassuring and instead landed like a door with a lock on the outside. She's in good hands. She needs a doctor, Cole said. She's being looked after. Hargett put his hand on Eli's shoulder. And Eli's body did the thing again, the shoulders, the neck, the compression. That is not a child being embarrassed or caught out, but a person whose nervous system has learned what this particular contact means and is responding to the learning before the brain can intervene. Hargett did not notice, or noticed and filed it differently. Either answer was the same answer, and it was the wrong one. I'd like to take him back, Hargett said. Make sure he gets home safe. He was still smiling, but his eyes, when they settled fully on Cole, were doing something the smile was not. They were measuring, calculating the weight and nature of the obstacle in front of him and determining what category of response it required. Donna Briggs was standing in the kitchen doorway with a coffee carafe held at her side like something she had forgotten she was holding. Her expression was the expression of a woman who had seen this county's night shift version of itself enough times to know what she was looking at. Eli was staring at his soup bowl with the focused attention of a child consulting something that might tell him what to do. Cole looked at the bracelet on Eli's wrist, the white plastic, the name. The last man who had worn that name had been buried in a field outside Casper 7 years ago. And before the earth took him, he had looked at Cole with the directness of a man who has stopped having time for anything except what matters. And he had said, find them, and Cole had said yes. And then 7 years had happened, and now that name was sitting in his diner at midnight with wind-burned cheeks and a broken shoelace and a deputy's hand on its shoulder. Cole made a decision. He made it in the space between one heartbeat and the next, in the compressed moment that exists between the intake of breath and its release, and once it was made completely. He's going to finish his soup, Cole said. The smile on Hargett's face did not fall. It recalibrated. A small, precise adjustment, the expression of a man resetting the parameters of a calculation that has just received new input. Excuse me, he said. You heard me. The diner did not exhale so much as forget to breathe. The truckers had stopped chewing. The nurses had put down their phones. Rex Tolan was very still at the end of the table in the way that Rex was still when he was paying his fullest attention to something which was a different quality of stillness from the way other people were still. Dax Mercer had his hands around his coffee cup and was looking at a fixed point on the table with the focused neutrality of a man who is processing information and waiting for it to finish processing. Hargett looked around the room slowly, letting every person in it see that he was looking, that he was not affected by what he saw, that the composition of the room was not a variable that changed his calculation. Then he looked back at Cole. I'll be outside, he said, when he's ready. He walked to the door with the same unhurried step he had entered with, put his hat on without looking at anyone, pushed through into the cold. The door swung shut. The room exhaled. Eli Harper picked up his spoon. His hand was shaking, not from cold now, but from the tremor that comes after something has passed close enough that the body registered the proximity before the mind finished assessing it. He looked at the bowl. He did not look at the door. It's okay, Cole said. He said it knowing it wasn't. Not yet, but he said it with the steadiness that the situation required and that the boy needed, and some statements are not descriptions of the present condition, but commitments about the future one. Cole was making a commitment. Under the table, he pulled out his phone and sent a single message to Dax. 4 words, no punctuation, room 12, sunrise quiet. Dax's phone buzzed against the table. He read it without picking it up. He set his coffee down and stood and pulled his jacket off the back of his chair with the unhurried ease of a man who has just remembered somewhere he needs to be, and he said bathroom to no one in particular, and he walked toward the back of the diner, and he did not come back. Through the frost fog window, Cole could see the outline of Hargett's cruiser at the far end of the parking lot. Engine running, exhaust rising in white columns in the frozen dark. Light bar off. The vehicle patient and present in the way of things that have learned that waiting is not the same as losing. Eli ate. Cole watched. The soup was chicken broth with egg noodles, and Donna had put extra crackers on the side, the saltines in the paper packet, and Eli had opened the packet with the careful attention of a child performing a task he wanted to do correctly. He ate like someone who had been taught that eating slowly was respectful and had internalized the lesson even in conditions that argued for urgency. Between spoonfuls, he looked at Cole with those eyes brown deep, carrying something that had no business being in a 6-year-old's face. It was not sadness. It was not fear. It was the look of a child who has been required by circumstance to understand more of the adult world than the adult world would have chosen to show him, and who has processed that understanding and continued anyway. Cole had known one other person with eyes like that. He had buried that person 7 years ago. Now that person's son sat across from him in Black Hollow Diner at 15 minutes to midnight eating soup. He had walked half a mile through a blizzard to buy for his sick mother with $1.37. And outside in the parking lot, a county deputy sat in his cruiser with the engine running and a patience that Cole had not yet finished measuring. Cole stacked the coins at the corner of the table. Quarters, dimes, nickels, the Lincoln penny face up. He did not put them in his pocket. He did not leave them scattered. He stacked them in a column and left them there because it had not felt right to do anything else with them. And he had learned across enough years of situations where feeling mattered more than logic to trust that instinct. The jukebox clicked. Something started, not Merle Haggard this time, a different song, something slower and further back in the catalog. Cole didn't recognize it immediately. He registered only that it was quieter than what had been playing before, and that the room had settled into a new kind of stillness, the watchful stillness of a place that has understood something is happening within it and has decided to let it happen. Eli finished the soup. He set the spoon down in the bowl with a small, careful sound. He looked at Cole. "My mom," he said. "She's really sick." "I know," Cole said. "She didn't want me to come here." He said it without apology, without the defensive explanation that children offer when they've broken a rule. He said it as information, context, so that Cole would understand the complete picture. "But she couldn't get up. She tried. I heard her try." Cole held that sentence and did not flinch from what it contained. "What time did she try to get up?" Cole asked. Eli thought about it. "Before dark," he said, "and then again after, and then she stopped trying." Cole looked at the window. The snow was still coming down in the parking lot, catching the light from the diner sign and turning it amber before it hit the ground. The cruiser was still there. The exhaust still rose in its patient columns. Everything outside was exactly what it had been 15 minutes ago, which meant the situation was holding but not improving, and Cole had enough experience with situations that hold without improving to understand what that eventually meant. His phone buzzed. He looked at it under the table. "Dax, she's here. Sick. Fever. She knew your name." 3 sentences. Cole read them twice. 3 sentences that told him everything he needed to know about what was in room 12 at the Sunrise Motel and everything he needed to know about how long this night was going to be. He sent back one word: stay. He put the phone in his jacket pocket and looked at Eli Harper, who was sitting across from him with empty soup bowl and cracker wrapper and $1.37 stacked in a column at the corner of the table. Who had walked half a mile in a February blizzard with everything he had and nothing to spare? Who had stood in the doorway of a room full of strangers and conducted his private audit and decided the audit passed and walked to the table that mattered. And Cole thought about a field outside Casper on a gray November Tuesday 7 years ago, about a hand in his hand and a voice that still had enough left in it to ask for one thing, and about the weight of a yes that he had not honored. Outside, the cruiser idled. The exhaust rose. The snow came down. And Eli Harper looked at Cole Raines across the table in the quiet of Black Hollow Diner with those brown eyes, and did not look away because he was 6 years old, and he had walked half a mile in a blizzard, and he had put everything he had on the table, and he was waiting. The way his father had known how to wait, the way Cole would understand later looking back, was something that ran in that family like bone structure or eye color. Inherited and indelible, he was waiting to find out if the thing he had bet everything on was going to pay. Cole looked back at him, and somewhere in that held gaze between one breath and the next, the night made its turn. Dax Mercer did not use the back door of Black Hollow Diner because he was afraid of Hargett seeing him leave. He used it because men like Hargett always watched the front, and Dax had learned 20 years ago that the most dangerous thing you could do to a man who controlled exits was to use one he didn't know existed. The cold received him like a verdict. -12 with the wind chill, and the wind was not abstract, it was directional and mean, coming out of the north with the malice of something that had been building across open country for 300 miles before it found Black Hollow and decided this was where it would spend itself. The alley behind the diner was a channel that focused the wind rather than broke it. And Dax walked into it with his head down and his jacket pulled tight, and his hands visible at his sides, the way he kept them when he was moving towards something that might require him to be read correctly on first impression. His boots on the packed snow made the only sound he was making. His breath came out in hard white bursts that the wind destroyed before they could form into anything. He kept his pace measured, not hurried. Hurried men look like men with something to hide, and Dax had nothing to hide tonight except his destination and his purpose, which were the two things that mattered. The Sunrise Motel was half a mile up Highway 16, and it sat at the edge of the road, the way bad memories sit at the edge of consciousness, present without being confrontational. There, every time you looked in that direction, too familiar to be alarming and too persistent to be ignored. He had clocked it on the ride in, noted it the way he noted things that looked wrong before he could articulate why. 12 units in an L shape, exterior walkway with the railing rusting at the joints, 3 cars and a pickup in the lot. The vacancy sign reading something that wasn't a word. The office dark. That was the first thing Dax noticed when he came around the front of the building. The office was dark. Past midnight in February in Black Hollow, with a storm shutting down the highway, and the motel office had nobody in it, and no light on, and no sign that anyone was monitoring anything. Maybe that was normal for this place. Maybe it wasn't. Dax filed it without deciding yet. Room 12 was the last unit in the L, tucked into the corner, where the 2 wings of the building met at a right angle. 1 exterior wall visible from the parking lot. 3 walls pressed against other units or concrete. The geography of a room someone had put a person in when they wanted it to be difficult to hear that person. Private in the way that isolation is private, which is different from the way that preference is private. Dax stood at the edge of the parking lot for 2 minutes without moving in the shadow outside the cone of the one working lamp above the office entrance and watched room 12. The curtain was closed. There was light behind it, television light. The blue-gray pulse of something playing for no one the way people leave televisions on when they don't want a room to feel completely empty. A shadow moved across the inside of the curtain, once slow and effortful. The movement of a body working hard to accomplish something simple. He crossed the parking lot and knocked. 3 times, unhurried. With the rhythm he'd developed over years of knocking on doors that didn't know him. The rhythm that said, I'm not leaving without being acknowledged, but I'm also not a threat. And I know the difference between those 2 things, even if you don't know me well enough yet to trust that I do. Silence from inside. Then movement, the labored, careful movement he'd seen in the shadow. The sound of a body negotiating with itself about whether it had enough left to reach the door. Then nothing. Ma'am, Dax said through the door. His voice was quiet, calibrated to carry through the door without carrying past it. My name is Dax Mercer. I'm with the Iron Saints out of Black Hollow. Your son Eli is safe. He's at the diner up the road. He's eating and he's warm. He paused. Let that land gave it the seconds it needed. I just need to know you're okay. 10 seconds. 20. Long enough that Dax began running contingency calculations. The chain rattled. The deadbolt turned. The door opened inward by 3 inches and then stopped, held not by the chain was already off, but by the fact that the person opening it had reached the limit of what she had available for the task. Dax got his first look at Lena Harper. She was 32 years old, though she looked older in the way that illness ages people. By compressing time, not adding years to the face, but removing the buffer between the surface and what's underneath it, so that everything becomes more immediate and less protected. Dark hair matted to one side, gray thermal shirt and sweatpants that had the look of clothes put on because they were the closest things and not for any other reason. A hospital bracelet on her left wrist that matched the one her son was wearing half a mile down the road. The same white plastic, the same institutional font. Her eyes were brown and fever bright, and even through the fever they were doing the work of reading him, taking him in, processing, making the assessment that she did not have the luxury of getting wrong. She was holding the door frame with both hands, one on each side, and Dax recognized the posture for what it was. Not caution, not hostility, but the practical necessity of a body that needed external support to remain vertical. "Where is he?" she said. Not a question shaped like a question. A demand that had used its last available energy on the words themselves and had nothing left for the interrogative inflection. "He's safe," Dax said. "I give you my word on that." She studied him the way people study things when they are past the point of having the energy to be wrong. She looked at his cut, the Iron Saints patch, the road dirt, the scar under his jaw, the way he was standing with both hands visible, which he had learned was something frightened people needed to see. She looked at his face. She was doing something with her eyes that was sophisticated enough that he could see it happening. A full environmental and character assessment conducted by a woman who was running on a fraction of her capacity and was still thorough. "He's with Cole Raines," she said. It was not a question. Dax went very still. "You know that name." "Caleb talked about him." Her voice dropped on Caleb's name. Not the drop of something gone distant, but the drop of something still close enough to hurt. "Come in or stay out. The cold is getting in either way." Dax came in. The room was what rooms in motels like this always were, which was to say exactly enough to function and nothing beyond that. A double bed with a comforter washed so many times its pattern was a memory of itself. A nightstand with a lamp and a bottle of ibuprofen that was almost empty, he could see from the door that it was almost empty by the weight of the shadow it cast. The television was on with the sound muted, a cable news channel running silent footage of a highway closure somewhere south. The room smelled like illness and the stillness that settles into spaces where someone has been very sick for a long time. But it was what was on the nightstand that Dax cataloged first and most carefully with the silent, systematic attention he brought to things that mattered. Medical bills, a stack of them, the kind that come in envelopes with windows that show the amount due in a way designed to be impossible to ignore. A court document with a county seal at the top, folded in a way that suggested it had been opened and read and folded back more times than was comfortable. An envelope with no return address that had been opened along the top with something sharp and then refolded in a way that was different from how it had originally been folded, the creases not matching the paper carrying the memory of being handled repeatedly. Lena Harper made it to the bed and sat on the edge with the deliberate economy of someone managing pain they have stopped naming out loud. She looked at Dax and waited. "How long have you been sick?" he asked. "Pneumonia. 3 weeks." She touched her wrist, the bracelet, without appearing to notice she was doing it. "I was in county hospital for 6 days. They discharged me because the insurance stopped covering." Her jaw tightened, one contraction controlled immediately. "I didn't tell Eli how bad it was. I told him I was getting better." She looked at the bills on the nightstand. "He knew anyway. He's like his father that way." Dax looked at the court document, the county seal, the shape of it. That's a custody petition, Lena said before he could ask. Filed 3 days ago on an emergency basis. Her voice had gone flat in the way that very emotional people sometimes go flat when they have processed something past the point where it makes noise. Deputy Hargett told the court, I'm an unfit mother due to my medical condition and my alleged associations with criminal elements. She paused, one breath that sounded like it cost her. He's been building that case for 8 months. 8 months, Dax said. Since Caleb's brother Dale died. She looked at her hands. Dale was older. He had 40 acres outside Casper land. Caleb identified years ago with a mineral rights agreement attached. Dale's will left it to Eli. Caleb set that up before he died. He was careful about it. Her eyes came up. The land and the agreement are worth around $900,000 over the next decade based on current extraction estimates. Maybe more. Dax kept his face neutral, and Hargett's interest in that. Hargett doesn't have his own interest. He has someone else's interest. She reached past the ibuprofen and lifted the court document, held it for a moment, set it back down. There's a man named Gerald Strom. He runs a land acquisition company out of Cheyenne. He has been working his way through 4 Wyoming counties for 3 years, identifying properties with unresolved mineral rights and acquiring them, through legal means when possible. She paused. Through other means when not. She looked at the document. Hargett is his other means. Dax looked at the envelope with no return address. That came 8 weeks ago, Lena said. No name on it, just a number, an amount, what it would take for me to sign over the mineral rights claim and relocate. She didn't elaborate on what she'd done with it. She didn't need to. The envelope was still here and she was still here, and the mineral rights were apparently still the subject of a custody petition, which answered the question. Tell me about the 8 months, Dax said. What he built. Lena Harper looked at him for a moment with those fever-bright eyes that were still sharp enough to take him apart if she wanted to. Then she told him. Hargett had started with documentation. Every time Eli left the motel room without adult supervision, Hargett recorded it, time, duration, conditions. Every missed school day when they were between motels and Lena couldn't arrange transport. Every medical appointment Lena had canceled because she didn't have a ride or couldn't afford the copay or was too sick to sit in a waiting room for 3 hours. He had built over 8 months, a file that told a coherent and plausible story about a mother who could not adequately care for her child, a story assembled from true facts, arranged to produce a false conclusion. He lets Eli run, Lena said. And this was where the flatness in her voice finally reached its limit, and something underneath it became audible. Not grief, something harder and more current than grief. He doesn't stop him. He doesn't intervene. He documents it and he leaves, and then he has another entry for the file. Tonight I told Eli specifically to stay in this room. I told him 3 times. I told him because I knew Hargett was around, and I knew what another incident meant for the petition. She pressed her fingers against her mouth for a moment. Let it pass. Eli is 6 years old, and he was trying to save me, and I could not make him stop trying. And Hargett knew that, and he has been counting on it for 8 months. The room held that sentence. Dax sat in the chair beside the door and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say to it, and he'd learned a long time ago that the things you have nothing useful to say to are sometimes the most important things you can let exist in the air without trying to fix them. His phone buzzed. Colgo. He sent back what he had, room 12 light on someone inside, not Eli. And then she's here. Sick. Fever. She knew your name. Cole, stay. Dax pocketed the phone. He looked at the court document again, at the county seal at the shape of the filing information across the top. What judge signed the emergency filing, he asked. Raymond Cobb, Lena said. 4th District. Dax filed that. And Hargett, he's been inside this room. It wasn't quite a question. Lena looked at the door. Enough times that Eli started sleeping with a chair against his door in whatever place we were staying. She said it without looking away from the door, as if she were reading the information off the surface of it. He figured it out before I admitted it to myself. Dax picked up his phone, opened the voice memo application, tapped record, and set it face down on the nightstand beside the ibuprofen. He had been in this room for 11 minutes when he heard the boots on the walkway outside. Not Cole's stride. He knew Cole's stride the way you know the sound of engines you have ridden beside. For 15 years, you didn't have to think about it, you just knew. These were slower, more deliberate. The footsteps of a man who was not concerned about being heard, because being heard was part of what he was communicating. 3 knocks. Unhurried practice with the confidence of someone who had knocked on this door before and knew exactly what kind of knock worked here. Miss Harper. Deputy Voss Hargett's voice through the door, smooth and warm, as something that has been refined until its origins are no longer detectable. I can see the lights on, just checking in. Lena's eyes went to Dax. Something moved through them. Fear, yes, but underneath it, something that had been living with the fear long enough to have changed shape. The expression of a woman who has been afraid of a specific thing for long enough that the fear has transformed into something colder and more useful. Dax held up one hand. Open palm. Stay. He picked up the phone from the nightstand, recording still running, and held it in his left hand as he crossed to the door and opened it. Hargett had his hat off again, snow on the shoulders of his coat melting into dark, irregular patches. The smile. He took in Dax with one practiced sweep, the cut the size, the fact of him being inside Lena Harper's motel room past midnight, and nothing in his face changed except a small, precise recalibration behind the eyes that lasted less than a second and then was gone. Didn't catch your name earlier, Hargett said pleasantly. No, Dax agreed. You didn't. This is a welfare check. Private residence. His tone was the tone of a man stating administrative facts rather than making arguments, which was a more sophisticated approach than making arguments. I'm going to need you to step outside. She invited me in. Still going to need you to step out. They looked at each other across the threshold with the snow falling between them, and Dax understood something about Voss Hargett that he wanted to make sure he understood correctly before he proceeded. This was a man for whom the word no was not a terminal condition, but an opening position. A man who had arrived in enough situations where he had the institutional weight to turn a no into a yes through patience and process and the authority of a badge in a county that trusted him. He was standing in front of Dax at midnight in a snowstorm and smiling about it because he had already run every possible configuration of this encounter and found himself ahead in all of them. She needs medical attention, Dax said. I'm going to call an ambulance. Medical decisions regarding Miss Harper are currently under active court consideration given the pending custody evaluation. Any outside interference with her care at this juncture could be construed as, say the word interference again, Dax said quietly, and I'm going to start wondering what exactly you're interfering with. The smile held, barely. From behind Dax, Lena Harper spoke. Her voice was thin and it cost her, and she spent it anyway. And what came out was even. Get out of my doorway, Voss. Something moved across Hargett's face. Quick private gone before it fully formed, but Dax caught it, the expression of a man who has spent 8 months trying to make a woman feel powerless and has just been called by his first name in a tone that made him feel like the smaller person in the exchange. It was not rage. It was something that wanted to be rage and had been trained not to be, which was its own kind of information. We'll talk tomorrow, Lena, Hargett said. He smiled at Dax, the full architectural smile, the one with no warmth underneath it, now that they both knew that. Then he turned and walked back along the walkway, with the unhurried step, the hat going back on the coat, dark against the falling snow. Patient, certain. The walk of a man who believes that tomorrow belongs to him in ways tonight doesn't yet. Dax watched him go until he rounded the corner of the building. Then he closed the door and engaged the deadbolt and stopped the voice recording and sent the audio file to Cole without a word. He looked at Lena. How many times has he been inside this room? She was looking at the door. More than once, she said, And then after a pause, he never did anything. He would just be here, ask questions about Eli's routine, about our finances, about who we were in contact with. She paused again. He did it so that I would understand that he could. Dax's phone buzzed. Cole ambulance is 2 minutes out. Come in myself. Keep her there. Dax typed back, Hargett is here. A pause, then Cole, I know. The ambulance came as requested. No lights, no siren. The quiet arrival that Cole had arranged through a paramedic. He knew a favor called in with the economy of a man who keeps track of what he's owed and what he owes and understands the difference. 2 paramedics came through the door of room 12 and assessed Lena Harper with the efficiency of people who had worked rural Wyoming emergencies long enough to understand that the official account of a situation was rarely its complete account. Petra Wills checked the pulse oximeter reading and showed it to Jules Okafor without comment. SpO 281%, fever at 103.4. The pneumonia had progressed in the 3 days since her discharge from County Hospital in ways that the discharge paperwork had either failed to anticipate or failed to mention. And Petra said quietly to Dax in the doorway in the flat factual tone of someone delivering information that needs to be received rather than softened. Another night in this room might have been her last night. Dax stood in the doorway and received that without expression. They loaded Lena with the careful economy of professionals moving someone who needed to be moved but couldn't afford additional damage. Lena on the gurney looked at Dax with those eyes and said one thing, Eli. He's with Cole, Dax said. Nothing is going to happen to him tonight. She held his gaze for a moment, assessing whether the statement merited the weight he was putting behind it. Apparently it did. She let it go and let the paramedics do their work, and the ambulance backed out of the Sunrise Motel parking lot with its lights still off the red and blue dark against the snow, and was gone around the bend of Highway 16 before Dax had finished watching it leave. He was still standing in the parking lot watching the bend of highway where the ambulance had disappeared when he saw it. Room 4. The curtain moved one slow displacement, and then stillness, the stillness of something that had been watching and had decided it had seen enough. A rental car was backed into the space in front of it, angled for a clear line of sight to the parking lot exit. Dax had noted it on the walk up from the diner and filed it without conclusion. Now he looked at it again with different eyes. Cole came around the corner of the motel building 2 minutes later and stopped beside him. They stood together for a moment looking at the closed door of room 12 and the nightstand visible through the window where the curtain had been left 3 inches open, the lamp still on the ibuprofen bottle, the stack of bills, the court document with the county seal. Cole had his phone in his hand. He was reading something on it. He read it twice. Then he held it out to Dax without a word. A text message. Unknown number. Received 4 minutes ago. You are outside your jurisdiction, Mr. Rains. The boy is in my custody as of 11:58 p.m. per emergency family court order signed by Judge Raymond Cobb. Any interference will result in obstruction charges. Eli Harper will be transferred to county emergency foster care within the hour. I suggest you spend the rest of your evening enjoying Black Hollow's hospitality and leave this matter to the appropriate authorities. Dax read it again, did the math. 11:58 p.m., the timestamp on the order. While Hargett had still been inside the diner, standing at Eli's table conducting his performance of casual paternal concern, while he had had his hand on the boy's shoulder. The judge had signed the order then, which meant Hargett had made the call before he walked into the diner. Possibly before Eli had walked in. The filing had been prepared in advance. The welfare check at room 12 had been the final box on a checklist that had been written days ago. Every minute of tonight had been choreographed, and what had looked like Hargett responding to the situation had actually been Hargett executing a plan that the situation had been arranged to accommodate. He didn't lose control when Eli walked into the diner, Dax said. No, Cole said. He used it. The cold intelligence of that. Eli walking out of the motel room hadn't broken Hargett's plan. It had completed it. One more documented instance of a mother unable to supervise her child this time, with 70-some witnesses and a county deputy on scene to observe and record. The boy walking to the diner hadn't been a variable. It had been the final piece of evidence in a file that had been building for 8 months. Cole was looking at room 4. That curtain moved, he said. I saw it. Rental car. Backed in. Here before we arrived. Dax had already run the calculus. Whoever it is, they watched Lena get loaded into that ambulance and didn't come out. Didn't call anyone we can identify. That's not Hargit's people. No, Cole said. It's not. He walked to room 4 and knocked. 3 times, unhurried. The rhythm that says, I'm not going anywhere. Nothing. He knocked again. Same rhythm. From inside, a voice female controlled in the way that professional training produces rather than natural calm. I'm not involved in what is happening tonight. Then you'd be the only one in Black Hollow who isn't, Cole said. Open the door. A pause long enough that the snow accumulated measurably on his shoulders. The door opened. She was 50-something, slight, with silver-threaded dark hair, cut short and practical, and glasses that were slightly crooked from having just been put on. She was wearing dark slacks, a gray button-down boots already laced. She had been awake and dressed and waiting, not sleeping, through the noise in the parking lot. In her right hand, held low and visible in a way that was simultaneously unthreatening and precise, was a black leather credential wallet. Open. Cole read it again. Evelyn Hart, Wyoming State Judiciary, Senior Circuit Judge, 4th District. Dax behind Cole's left shoulder made a sound that communicated the full range of human surprise in a single syllable. Come in, Hart said. It was not a question. Both of you. The room was a working space, not a space anyone was sleeping in. Laptop open on the small desk, its screen showing a document she partially closed as they entered. A legal pad dense with handwriting, page after page of it. A manila folder thick enough to suggest months of accumulation. A disposable coffee cup from the diner cold. And on the nightstand, a second phone sitting dark and separate from the smartphone on the desk. The kind of separation that meant something was being kept off a traceable network. You've been here before tonight, Cole said. 4 days, Hart said. She sat in the desk chair and looked at both of them with the economy of a person who had spent decades in rooms where time and words were currencies that shouldn't be wasted. I have been building a case against Deputy Voss Hargit, Judge Raymond Cobb, and a Cheyenne businessman named Gerald Strome for the past 14 months. She opened the manila folder, set 3 photographs on the bed between them, printed not digital, the kind of photographs you print when you don't want them on a server. Cole looked at them. The first Hargit at a restaurant table with a man in a suit Cole didn't recognize. The second, the same suited man outside a county courthouse with a judge. The third, a land survey document with yellow highlighter across a section designation that Cole recognized immediately. 40 acres outside Casper. His name is Gerald Strome, Hart said, touching the photograph of the suited man. He operates a land acquisition company out of Cheyenne. For the past 3 years, he has been systematically identifying properties with unresolved mineral rights in 4 Wyoming counties and acquiring them through legal means when possible and through other means when not. She looked at Cole. Eli Harper's inheritance represents the largest single mineral rights parcel in his portfolio, worth conservatively $1.2 million over the next decade. Cole sat down on the edge of the bed, not because he needed to, because the information required a different posture. Hargit works for Strome, Cole said. Hargit has been on Strome's payroll for 2 years. Judge Cobb has been accepting case assignments from Strome's attorney for 3. The custody claim against Lena Harper was engineered. The hospital discharge was expedited by a billing administrator who receives consulting payments from a shell company connected to Strome. She paused. Lena was supposed to deteriorate to the point where she couldn't contest the custody order. Eli was supposed to enter the foster system under a guardian arrangement that would allow Strome's attorney to petition for administrative control of the inheritance as part of the child's care management. The room held the silence of people receiving information that rearranges the architecture of everything they understood before they walked through the door. 14 months, Dax said from the window ledge where he'd positioned himself, arms crossed. And it's still not done. Evidence gathered outside proper channels is inadmissible, Hart said. I cannot use anything I've collected here in a formal proceeding. What I have is a complete picture of the thing. To dismantle it, I need evidence gathered, correctly documented, correctly submitted through a chain of custody that Strome's attorney cannot challenge. She took off her glasses and pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose, the first entirely human gesture she'd made since opening the door. Tonight was not supposed to happen this way. Hargett was not supposed to move on the custody claim until next week. Something accelerated his timeline. Eli came to the diner, Cole said. Hart looked at him. A recalibration, the adjustment of someone working from an incomplete picture who has just received the piece that changes its dimensions. Once Eli walked into a room full of witnesses, and one of them turned out to have a connection to the Harper name, Cole continued. Hargett knew he was losing control of the information environment, so he moved the order forward. Hart studied Cole for a moment. Then she said quietly, "You knew Caleb Harper." "He was my brother." Something shifted in Hart's expression, not surprise, but the specific adjustment of a person who has been doing math with incomplete variables and has just received the one that makes everything balance. She looked at her folder, then back at Cole. "Then you understand that what happens to that boy tonight is not a legal abstraction." "I understood that before you told me any of this," Cole said. Hart leaned forward. "I cannot stop what Hargett is doing tonight through official channels without destroying 14 months of casework. If I surface now, Strome's attorney files a judicial misconduct complaint against me within 24 hours, and everything I've built becomes tainted. The case collapses. Strome walks. Hargett keeps his badge, and Eli Harper grows up in a foster arrangement while a land company extracts $1 million from his inheritance." She held Cole's eyes. "But I can tell you what someone without legal constraints could do." She produced a card from the desk, plain white, a handwritten number, no name. "Document everything that happens tonight. Every word Hargett says, every action he takes, every person he contacts. Get witnesses, get recordings. Ensure that by morning there is a body of evidence so substantial and so clearly obtained through civilian observation, not judicial investigation, that a state prosecutor has no choice but to act." She held the card out. "But do not touch Hargett. Do not threaten him, impede him, or give him any basis for an obstruction charge. Because the moment a member of the Iron Saints puts a hand on a county deputy, the story becomes about that. And Strome and Cobb and Hargett drink coffee in an office somewhere while you are in a cell." Cole took the card. "The recording Dax made in room 12, Hart said. Send it to that number, not from your own phone." Cole stood up, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "When do you move?" he asked without turning. A longer pause. The sound of a woman doing a calculation she had been putting off for 14 months and had just run out of road to avoid. "When you have the boy in front of witnesses and Hargett on camera with the fraudulent document," Hart said. "When there is enough that my involvement becomes outcome determinative rather than case building. When what I burn is worth what it produces." A breath. "Not before." Cole nodded once. Walked out. The snow received him back. Dax was at his side by the time he cleared the overhang. "You trust her," Dax said. "I trust that her interests and Eli's interests align tonight," Cole said. "That's what I need." They moved back toward the diner. They were 30 yards from the entrance when Cole's phone buzzed with a message from Boone Callard, the youngest full-patch 29 years old, who had been inside watching everything with the quiet, comprehensive attention that was his primary professional gift. Cole read it over. Dax read it over Cole's shoulder. "One of the prospects, kid named Garrett, who'd been inside watching Hargett, says the order number on the custody document doesn't exist in the 4th District filing system. Doesn't exist in the 3rd District system either. He called his cousin at the county clerk's office." She ran it twice. That order was never officially filed anywhere in Wyoming. The document is real paper, real signature. The case number is fabricated. Cole stopped walking. Dax stopped beside him. The snow came down between them and the diner with its lit windows and its neon, and the jukebox that had started up again inside, and the 70-some men who were waiting without being told they were waiting, because that was what the Iron Saints did when Cole Raines went quiet in a way that meant the situation had changed. "He's not executing a court order," Dax said. "No," Cole said. "He took Eli out of a public building in front of witnesses with a document that doesn't legally exist." Dax let the full weight settle. "That's not corruption anymore. That's abduction," Cole said. The words sat in the cold air between them, and neither of them said anything else for a moment, because the word had changed the shape of the night completely, and they both needed a second to feel the new shape of it before they started moving inside it. Cole looked at the diner. Through the window, he could see Boone at the counter, phone in hand, face angled to catch both the door and the remaining tables in his peripheral vision. He could see Rex Tolan near the back, with the relaxed alertness of a man who had decided that the posture of patience was the most useful thing he could offer right now. He could see Donna behind the counter with the coffee carafe and the expression of a woman who had been running this diner for 19 years and had seen enough of what the county's night shift looked like to know when something serious was in the building. He could not see Eli Harper, which meant Hargett had already left with him, which he had expected but which landed anyway with the force of something expected that is still wrong. His phone buzzed. "Boone, they're gone. Hargett put him in the cruiser 4 minutes ago. Boy didn't cry, didn't fight. Looked back at the diner once before he got in. Got in on his own." Cole read it and put the phone in his pocket and breathed one breath of the Wyoming air, which tasted like iron and old snow, and the cold that comes before something breaks. Then his phone buzzed again. "Boone, they're not heading south." Hargett turned north on 16. "North Cole. There's nothing north of Black Hollow for 40 miles except Maple Ridge." Dax said it quietly, almost to himself, Strom. "Maple Ridge Lodge. 40 miles up Highway 16 into the mountains. A private property owned by a Cheyenne businessman who used it 3 weeks a year for hunting and kept it staffed year-round." Cole knew the name attached to it now with a certainty that didn't require confirmation. Gerald Strom. Hargett was not taking Eli Harper to emergency foster care. He was taking him to the man who had ordered all of it, the 8 months of documentation, the fabricated petition, the hospital discharge, the envelope with no return address and a number on it. He was delivering the boy directly to the source. The foster system had been the story told to anyone who asked questions. This lodge on this mountain had always been the destination. And Maple Ridge was 40 miles up a mountain highway in a storm that had, just according to the alert that pushed to Cole's phone at that exact moment, been upgraded to a level 3 closure. Highway 16 North would be impassable within the hour. Whatever happened at Maple Ridge Lodge tonight would happen beyond the reach of anyone who could not push through 40 miles of mountain whiteout at 1 in the morning. Cole looked at the parking lot. 77 Harley-Davidson motorcycles covered in February snow engines, cold. The Iron Saints Motorcycle Club. 11 years of annual memorial rides through Black Hollow. 70-some men who had buried brothers and kept promises across 3 decades of American asphalt, and who were sitting inside a diner right now waiting for a signal from their president because they had known, with the collective instinct of men who have learned to read the room Cole Raines is in, that tonight was not an ordinary night. Cole looked north up Highway 16, a wall of white and dark, the storm sitting on the mountain like something that had been there for a long time and intended to stay. He pulled out his phone and called the number listed in his contacts as a single initial. T. The kind of listing you use for contacts you don't want to have to explain. It rang twice, a voicemail awake in the way that some people are always awake regardless of the hour, answered without greeting. "It's been a while," the voice said. "I need phone records," Cole said. "Cell and County Dispatch. Person of interest is a county deputy named Voss Hargett, Black Hollow, Wyoming. Tonight's calls. I need them within 2 hours." A pause. "That's a federal violation." I know what it is. The price went up since last time. I know it did. Another pause. 2 hours, the voice said. Send me the number. The line went dead. Dax was looking at him. I know what it costs, Cole said. I know you know, Dax said, not arguing. Locating himself, finding the line he stood on when Cole crossed one he'd noted so they both knew exactly where they were. Okay. Cole walked into the diner. The room read him correctly the moment he came through the door. The Iron Saints turned with the coordinated attention of men who had been waiting without being told they were waiting, and the civilian tables caught the shift in the room's frequency and went still in response. Cole stopped in the middle of the floor. Listen up. His voice cut through the diner without rising. Not a shout. Something colder and more specific than a shout, the frequency that every man in that room had been conditioned across years to stop everything for. We have a child being transported north on 16 by a county deputy using a fraudulent court order. Destination is Maple Ridge Lodge, 40 miles up the mountain. Highway closes in under an hour. He looked at the Iron Saints, all of them, every face. I need riders who understand what tonight costs. Nobody moves who isn't clear on that. Nobody sat down. 70-some men stood up. Cole felt something move through his chest that he did not try to name. Rex Tolan was already at his shoulder. 22, he said. The filtering had already happened in Rex's head, who was road-capable for mountain ice at 1 in the morning, who had prior records that made tonight a different kind of risk. 22 is enough to close that road behind us and not look like an army when we arrive. Boone's in the civilian car, Cole said. Donna's Forestry Road. Donna Briggs was already at the end of the counter with an order pad and a pen. She looked at Cole with the expression of a woman who has decided which side of a thing she is on and is not interested in discussing the decision. My ex-husband used it deer season for 20 years, she said. Unpaved, but it's been graded. Car can make it in this weather if the driver's not stupid. She started drawing. In the 4 minutes it took to organize, Cole stepped to the table where Eli had been sitting. The soup bowl, the cracker wrapper, and the coins $1.37 stacked in the column he had made while the boy watched him count. He left them there. Then he went outside into the cold that was a different and more honest thing than the cold inside, and he pulled on his gloves and he stood at the edge of the parking lot and looked north up Highway 16 at the white and the dark and the mountain that held Maple Ridge Lodge, somewhere in its 40 miles of altitude. Rex put a helmet in his hands. Cole put it on. He threw a leg over the Road King and felt the geometry of it settle under him. The weight, the width, the specific solidity of a machine built to go through things rather than around them. He turned the key. The engine came alive beneath him with the sound that was also a heartbeat, that was also a warning, that was also the only answer to certain kinds of questions that words were insufficient to address. Around him, 21 other engines answered. The sound of it filled the parking lot and climbed into the dark above Black Hollow and went out across the snow-covered land in every direction. And inside the diner, Donna Briggs stood at the window and watched. And the truckers stood at the window and watched. And the nurses stood at the window and watched with the expression of people witnessing something they would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe accurately and never quite managing it. Cole pulled out of the lot and onto Highway 16 North, and 21 Harleys fell in behind him like the end of a sentence that had been building for 7 years. The cold at speed was a different thing entirely from the cold standing still. Standing still. February in Wyoming was an ambient condition, something you dressed against and managed and moved through on your way to being somewhere warmer. At speed on a mountain highway in a level 3 storm, it became something with intention. It found every gap in his gear with the focused persistence of something that had decided this particular gap was its business. The quarter-inch between his collar and his jaw, the seam at his left wrist where the glove met the jacket cuff, the narrow space between boot leather and pant leg that he'd never found a way to fully close in 20 years of winter riding. The cold moved into each of these spaces and made itself at home and did not negotiate. His visor iced at the edges within the first mile. Not enough to block vision, but enough to remind him that the machinery he was operating was in an environment it had not been designed for, and that the distance between manageable and unmanageable was shorter up here than anywhere else. The road was white from shoulder to shoulder. The lane markings were gone, buried beneath the accumulation, and Cole was reading the highway the way he'd learned to read it in conditions like this, not through his eyes, which were giving him a tunnel of white caught in his headlight beam that the brain wanted to interpret as stillness, but through the bike itself. The slight pull left when the front wheel lost traction for a half second on a patch of glaze ice beneath the powder. The compression changed when the surface hardened from packed snow to something more structural. The way the rear stepped out on a banked curve and required correction through weight shift before his hands knew to move the body, responding to information faster than consciousness could process it, which was what 20 years of riding in conditions that shouldn't be ridden in produced. Behind him, 21 riders doing the same thing. He could feel them without looking, not just hear them, feel them, the way you feel the presence of things you have been calibrated to over long enough time that they become part of your environmental awareness. Their corrections when the road shifted, the collective adjustment when a gust came off the ridge above them and tried to push the formation sideways. The sound of the engines changing pitch as they climbed, and the grade steepened, and the air thinned by increments that the machines registered before the riders did. Mile 4, Mile 5. The highway beginning to climb in earnest, now the flat approach giving way to the mountain's actual agenda, long sweeping curves that in summer were the kind of road you sought out, and in February were the kind of road that separated the decisions you'd made from the decisions that had made you. Cole kept his eyes on the road shoulder. The dead brown grass just visible at the white edge in his headlights reached the only reference point that told him where the pavement ended and the drop began. On his left on some of these curves, the drop was substantial. He did not look at it directly. Looking at the thing you don't want to go toward is how you go toward it. 60 yards back, the double red of Hargate's cruiser taillights in the dark. He had picked them up at mile 3, 2 red points, moving through the white at 30 miles an hour, cautious, not expecting company. A man in a county cruiser on a closed mountain highway at 1 in the morning with a 6-year-old boy in his back seat and 40 miles between himself and the destination where the evening's business would be concluded. A man who had spent 8 months building something and was now carrying it the final distance. Cole kept the 60 yards, far enough that in the storm and the dark, Hargate likely hadn't registered the headlights behind him as anything other than ambient reflection off the snow. Close enough to close the distance in under 10 seconds if the cruiser stopped. The mountain pushed them upward through its curves. The wind from the north came down the ridge in gusts that wanted to push the bike sideways, requiring constant counterpressure that accumulated in the hands and forearms first, and then the shoulders, the fatigue building in the places where the body was doing the most work. Cole felt it and noted it and set it aside in the compartment where you put things that are real but not currently relevant. He was thinking about a field outside Casper. He was thinking about the way the sky had looked that Tuesday in November 7 years ago. Flat and gray and borderless, the kind of sky that makes the ground feel like the only thing with definition in the world. He was thinking about the weight of a hand in his hand. Not heavy, Caleb had not weighed much by then, but present warm. Still the grip stronger than the body that contained it had any right to sustain. He was thinking about the words, the simplicity of them. Find them. Promise me. And he was thinking about what a man could build from a broken promise if he refused to let the breaking be the end of the story, if he decided that the failure was an installment and not a conclusion, if he rode 40 miles up a mountain in a level 3 storm at 1 in the morning and let that be the answer to 7 years of carrying a yes he hadn't honored. Mile 12. A curve that came faster than the previous ones, the guardrail appearing in his light with less warning than he'd have liked, and he leaned through it and felt the rear step and corrected and heard 3 bikes behind him do the same in quick succession, the sound of it moving back through the formation like a wave moving through water. The taillights ahead, still there, still moving. Mile 19. The taillights resolved into the clear shape of a county cruiser, roof bar county seal. On the rear panel, the silhouette of official machinery on an unofficial errand. Moving at 25 miles an hour now. The road had gotten worse above the 15-mile mark, the grade steeper, and the surface less predictable, and even Hargett was feeling it. Cole throttled back, kept the 60 yards, watched. Dax pulled even with him for a moment on the only straight stretch in the last 4 miles, and they rode side by side briefly, which was not safe, and both of them knew it, and neither of them adjusted it. Dax tilted his head at the cruiser and held up one open hand. Hold. Watch. Wait. Cole nodded once. Mile 26. The turnoff from Maple Ridge appeared as a gap in the tree line to the right, a private road breaking away from the highway and climbing at a steeper angle into the dark above. A wrought iron gate stood open, the motion sensor triggered by the cruiser that had gone through 3 minutes ahead of them, Cole estimated. A stone post at the road's edge with a small brass plate. No name. The kind of entrance that announces its owner's preferences through what it withholds. Cole killed his headlight. Behind him, 21 headlights went dark in sequence one by one, like a string of lights being unplugged from one end. The formation turned onto the private road in darkness, running on the ambient glow of the snow itself, which was enough in open terrain like this to see the road surface and the tree lines pressing in on either side. Enough to ride by if you had calibrated eyes and didn't need the road to tell you where it was. Slower now. The engines dropped to a muttered idle. 22 machines moving quiet through the dark, the way riders go quiet when they are arriving somewhere before they want to be heard. The lodge came around a bend in the private road a quarter mile from the gate. It was large in the way that certain kinds of money are large, not ostentatious, not decorated with its own importance, but simply scaled to a version of the world that most people don't live in. 3 stories of timber and stone with a covered porch spanning the full front face. Warm light in several windows. A detached garage to the left with its doors closed. 2 vehicles in the circular drive Hargett's County Cruiser and a black SUV with Cheyenne plates snow-dusted backed into position. Gerald Strom had arrived before Hargett, which meant Strom had been here waiting, which meant he had known tonight was the night before tonight became the night, which meant the acceleration of the timeline had not been improvisation. It had been execution of a plan that had always had this lodge on this mountain as its endpoint, and every piece of it going back 8 months had been pointing here. Cole stopped the formation at the tree line 50 yards from the circular drive and sat for a moment with the engine at idle and the snow falling around him and the mountain quiet except for the wind in the pines above. He took off his helmet. The cold grabbed his face immediately, the greeting of a mountain air in February at altitudes sharper and thinner and more honest than anything below. He looked at the lodge, at the windows, at the 2 vehicles. Rex Tolan materialized beside him without Cole having registered him moving. That was Rex's particular quality, the ability to be somewhere he hadn't been a moment ago without the intervening distance making itself known. "How do you want to do this?" Rex said. Not a question. Rex didn't ask questions in situations like this. He created space for information. "Front door," Cole said. "You and me." Dax stays at the tree line with the formation, visible from the lodge windows. "Present." He paused. "Nobody moves unless I call it or Hargett comes out with the boy and tries to leave. If Strom has his own security, then we find out at the front door." Rex's jaw worked once. The expression of a man who had done the math and arrived at an answer he didn't like and was going to proceed anyway because he trusted the person who'd given him the variables. "Don't do anything that needs a lawyer before I get back," he said, which was what Rex said when he had run out of practical objections and was recording his position for the historical record. Cole dismounted. He walked across the snow-covered drive toward the porch, with Rex 1 step behind him and to his right, in the cold and the dark, and the 40 miles of mountain between him and Black Hollow were behind him now. And ahead of him were the porch steps and the heavy timber door, and a camera mounted above the frame that was certainly recording and possibly monitored in real time. Cole looked directly into the lens as he came up the steps, unhurried. He gave whoever was watching the full 2 seconds of his face before he raised his hand and knocked. The door opened in under 20 seconds. The man who opened it was not Gerald Strom. He was 30-something compact, wearing civilian clothes that sat on him the way civilian clothes sit on people whose primary wardrobe is something else. He had the physical stillness of trained readiness, not tension, not aggression, just the absence of any motion that wasn't purposeful. He looked at Cole, at Rex behind Cole, at the 22 motorcycles visible at the tree line in the dark. He said nothing. Voss Hargett brought a child here, Cole said. Eli Harper, 6 years old. I want to see him. The man said, you need to leave. I need to see the boy, Cole said. After that, I'm happy to have whatever conversation needs to happen. From somewhere inside upper level, probably the auditory quality of sound traveling down a stairwell, the sound of a child's voice. Not words, just the sound of a child being somewhere in the building, talking or asking something, or simply making the ambient sound that children make when they are awake and present in a space. Which was enough, which was more than enough. And Cole's hand was on the doorframe before he had finished processing the decision to move it. Not pushing, not crossing the threshold, just presenting the gap between the door and the frame as a space that was going to remain a space. Last time, Cole said, the boy. The man's right hand moved to his hip, not drawing, locating. The gesture of someone wanting to establish the existence of an option without exercising it yet. Don't, said Rex from Cole's right shoulder, in the tone he used for things he had already decided were going to happen, and was extending the courtesy of announcing in advance. A voice from inside the lodge from somewhere back and to the left, calm and caring, let them in, Marcus. Marcus Greel stepped back from the door. The main room of Maple Ridge Lodge was everything the exterior promised: high timber ceilings, a stone fireplace large enough to stand in burning, with the confidence of a fire maintained by someone whose job it is to maintain it. Leather furniture arranged around it in the pattern of a room designed for men who conduct business in the posture of leisure. Trophy mounts on the walls. The smell of old wood and wood smoke and the kind of money that doesn't need to announce itself because the room announces it. Gerald Strom was standing in the center of the room. He was 60, perhaps 62, silver-haired, compact, the trim of a man who had maintained discipline across decades, not because he enjoyed it, but because he understood it as infrastructure. He was wearing pressed slacks and a flannel shirt and looked in every particular of his appearance like someone's reasonable grandfather. Cole had been in enough rooms with enough dangerous men to recognize that this was the most dangerous version of the type, not the version that looks dangerous, which is manageable, but the version that looks like the person in the room you trust with your children, because that version has learned something about the machinery of human judgment that the other version never had to. Deputy Voss Hargett stood near the far wall, hat in his hands. The smile was gone, and what was beneath it, without the smile, was older than Cole had expected. Not the face of a man running a scheme, but the face of a man who had been running something for long enough that he could no longer remember the version of himself that had existed before it. And on the leather sofa to the left, wrapped in a blanket too large for him, was Eli Harper. The blanket had slipped from one shoulder. His canvas sneakers stuck out from under its edge. The hospital bracelet on his wrist caught the firelight. He was looking at Cole from the moment Cole came through the door, and the look he gave him was the same look he had given him across the diner 3 hours ago, direct assessing, carrying something that had no business in a 6-year-old's face, and was there anyway. His chin moved, a small, barely perceptible lift. I'm okay. I've been waiting. Cole held the boy's eyes for one moment. Then he looked at Strom. Mr. Rains, Strom said with the pleasant tone of a man welcoming someone he had expected and already categorized. I want to resolve this quickly and without any further. The custody order has a case number that doesn't exist, Cole said. I had it checked twice in 2 systems. There is no record of that order anywhere in the Wyoming court system. The document is real paper with a real signature. The case doesn't exist. Something happened in Strom's eyes. A reassessment, the internal recalibration of a man who has walked into a conversation expecting a particular kind of opponent and found a different kind. The pleasant tone held, but it held the way a structure holds when you've located the stress fracture, technically intact, no longer trustworthy. What your deputy did tonight, Cole continued, he did in front of witnesses, on camera, with a recording of him threatening this child's mother in the hours before. He walked out of a public building at 1 in the morning with a 6-year-old using a document that doesn't legally exist. That's not corruption. That's a crime with witnesses. He paused. You want to resolve this quickly, so do I. I walk out of this room with Eli Harper, and whatever happens after that happens in the places where things like this are supposed to happen. He looked at Strom directly, the full weight of it. But I am walking out of here with the boy. Strom regarded Cole for a moment with the careful attention of a man who has built something over 3 years and is conducting the first serious assessment of whether the structure is going to hold. His eyes moved to Rex behind Cole, to Marcus Greel, who had repositioned near the fireplace, to the window where if he looked he could see 20 motorcycles at the tree line in the dark. Marcus, Strom said quietly. Marcus moved. He came from Cole's right with the efficiency of someone who had done this in controlled conditions enough times to have made it automatic 2 hands, a professional restraint designed to pull the target backward and off balance before they could respond to the contact. He was fast. He was trained. He got both hands on Cole's right arm before Cole's body had finished processing the motion. Rex Toland came through the front door. Rex was not running. Rex at speed did not require running. He crossed the room in 4 steps with the trajectory of something that has identified its destination and removed all other variables from consideration. His hand found Marcus Greel's collar. Marcus left the floor for approximately 1 second, long enough to constitute a clear transition between states before he met the wall beside the fireplace. The wall accepted the information and Marcus did not immediately offer a response to it. The room went entirely still. Hargett's hand was at his hip. His weapon was holstered. His eyes were running the calculation that Cole had known he would eventually run, the one where you assess whether the situation you're in is one you can shoot your way out of. Hargett was arriving at the answer that it was not. Not with 22 bikers visible from the window. Not with Boone Callard standing near the kitchen doorway. Boone had come up Donna's Forestry Road and through the back of the lodge in the last 20 minutes and was standing near the kitchen entrance with his phone recording and the expression of a man who has been in position long enough to have been thorough. Not with Rex Toland occupying the spatial center of the room like a physical argument against poor decisions. Hargett's hand left his hip. Eli Harper had not moved from the sofa. He was watching Cole with those eyes steady, unfrightened or frightened, and refusing it, and the distinction mattered, and Cole carried it. Cole walked to the sofa and crouched to the boy's level and said his name quietly. Eli stood up. The blanket fell from his shoulders. He stepped out from under it in his canvas sneakers, in his oversized gray hoodie, in his hospital bracelet, and he crossed the room to Cole's side and stood there, and Cole put his hand on the boy's shoulder, not gripping, not pulling, just present, and felt him breathe. Felt the breath go in and come out. Felt the quality of a small body deciding that it was allowed to stop holding everything it had been holding. Strom had not moved from the center of the room. He was looking at Cole with an expression that had completed its journey through every layer of grandfatherly warmth and arrived at the thing underneath which was cold and precise and much more accurate. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," Cole said, "it's not." His phone rang. Unknown number. He looked at it, answered it, put it on speaker because the room needed to hear whatever this was. A woman's voice. Controlled, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in large rooms full of people who would prefer not to hear them. "This is Captain Renata Marsh, Wyoming State Police. I have units 7 miles south of your current location. I have received documentation from a Wyoming Circuit Court judge indicating child endangerment and fraud in connection with a county custody filing in Black Hollow." A pause precisely calibrated to land where it needed to land. "Mr. Rains, is the child safe?" Every person in the room heard it. Strom heard it. Hargett heard it. Marcus Greel, reassembling himself against the wall by the fireplace, with the careful dignity of a man pretending the previous 90 seconds had not occurred. Heard it. Cole looked down at Eli. Eli looked up at him. 6 years old, canvas sneakers, hospital bracelet, catching the firelight, having ridden out a night that should not have been required of him, having waited in a lodge on a mountain for a man to come through a door and say his name. Cole's voice did something on the next word that he had not planned. A fracture, small and immediate, controlled within the same breath, but present for the 1 second it took to answer the only question that had actually mattered tonight. Yeah, he said, he's safe. Captain Marsh, keep everyone at the lodge. Do not allow anyone to leave. We're 9 minutes out. The call ended. Voss Hargett set his hat on the table beside him with the slow, deliberate motion of a man who has run out of calculations and has arrived at the last version of the situation, the one he had not rehearsed because he had not believed he would need it. He reached up and removed his badge with 2 fingers and held it out. He unholstered his service weapon with 2 fingers on the grip and offered it handle first. He did these things in the correct order correctly, because the procedural correctness of it was the last thing he had left, and he was keeping it. Strome looked at his phone. He looked at Cole. He looked at Eli standing at Cole's side in canvas sneakers with the hospital bracelet and the blanket abandoned on the sofa, and the full 40 miles of mountain between him and Black Hollow and his body, like a thing he had survived rather than a thing that had been done to him. Something crossed Strome's face, not fear, not yet, but the first cousin of it. The expression of a man who has spent 30 years believing that patience and capital were sufficient insulation from consequence and is making his first substantive update to that belief. He took out his phone and made a call. Captain Renata Marsh arrived in 4 vehicles. She was 50, moving through the front door of the lodge. The way experienced command officers move through spaces, they are taking authority of not fast, not announced, with the absolute directional certainty that makes everyone else in the room rearrange their understanding of who has jurisdiction here. She was a black woman with close-cropped silver at her temples, in the physical economy of someone who had spent decades making every motion count. She swept the room in 4 seconds. Strome, Hargett, Marcus Greel, Rex Toland, Boone at the kitchen entrance, Cole, and Eli. Her eyes stopped on Eli and did what trained eyes do when they find the thing they came for, confirmed, cataloged, moved to what needed to happen next. She crouched to the boy's level with the direct, unperforming calm of someone whose relationship to children in crisis was professional and genuine simultaneously. "My name is Captain Marsh," she said. "You're not in any trouble. You're not going anywhere you don't want to go tonight." She paused. "Is there somewhere you want to be?" Eli looked at Cole. Cole looked at Marsh. "His mother is at County Hospital. She was admitted tonight pneumonia that progressed after an early discharge that was not medically indicated." He held her eyes long enough to make sure the weight of those last 3 words landed correctly. "He should be with her." Marsh nodded to one of her officers. The officer stepped outside with his radio. She turned to Hargett with the quality of attention that a lens has when it focuses the same composure now directed to a single point. "Deputy Hargett, I'm going to ask you to hand me your service weapon and your badge. Slowly, both hands visible." Hargett was already holding them. He passed them across. Marsh took the weapon without looking away from his face, handed it to the officer behind her without looking at it. "Voss Hargett, you are under arrest for child endangerment, filing a fraudulent court instrument, and conduct unbecoming a peace officer. Further charges are pending investigation." She nodded. "Read him his rights outside." Hargett walked to the door between 2 state troopers. He passed the table where he'd set his hat. He reached for it, the automatic gesture the last reflex of a man whose identity had been worn like a uniform for long enough that removing it required a physical process he hadn't finished. One of the troopers lifted the hat gently from his hand and set it back on the table. Hargett walked out into the snow without it. Strome had not moved from his chair. His attorney was on the phone, and he was listening with the contained expression of a man receiving information about the shape of the damage and beginning to model the containment. When Marsh turned to him, he spoke first. "I want it on record that I did not direct Deputy Hargett to bring a child to this property. My presence here tonight is entirely Mr. Strom. Marcia's voice did not rise, did not change. We have you on a recorded call placing this address as a destination. We have financial documentation connecting you to Judge Cobb's case assignment process over 37 months. We have 14 months of compiled judicial conduct evidence from a sitting circuit court judge who is prepared to provide full testimony. She paused. You are absolutely right to call your attorney. The conversation you're about to have requires one. Strom looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him. And then Cole looked away because Strom was finished, not tonight, not in this room. It would take months and warrants and the systematic dismantling of 3 years of layered legal manipulation, but finished in the structural sense. The weight he'd been carrying would not be carried much longer. Cole could feel it the way you feel a compromise thing when you know what intact feels like. He walked to Eli. Ready, he said. Eli looked at the windows. The blue and red of Marcia's vehicles was bleeding through the glass, now light moving across the walls of the lodge in slow rotations. He watched it for a moment with the expression of a child who has been asked a question that has a complicated answer and is working out how to give the simple one. Is she going to be okay, he said. His mother. He had meant his mother for every minute of the last 4 hours without saying it directly, which was the courage of a child who understood that asking the question out loud made the answer more real. She was alive and being treated when I last had word, Cole said. That's the truth I have right now. Eli processed it, accepted the available information, the way his father had accepted available information, not demanding more than existed, working with what was there. Okay, he said. They walked out of the lodge together into the snow and the cold and the rotating light. The Iron Saints were at the tree line, 22 men in the dark, and they watched Cole come through the lodge door with the boy. And what happened in the formation in that moment was not triumph and not relief, but something quieter and more durable, the look of men who have done what they came to do and are standing in the weight of it. Rex Toland was the first one Cole saw clearly. The big man at the edge of the tree line with snow on his shoulders and his face doing something complicated that he rearranged immediately because Rex did not perform emotion in public. Cole saw the 3 seconds before the rearrangement and filed it where he kept things that mattered. Eli looked at the formation. 22 men in the dark in the snow on a mountain at 2 in the morning. Men who had ridden 40 miles in a level 3 storm for a child they had not known 3 hours ago. Eli looked at them the way he had looked at everything tonight directly, without flinching, with eyes that carried too much of his father in them, for Cole to look at them for long without feeling the pressure of what they contained. He walked to the tree line, stopped in front of Rex Toland, who was the nearest and also the largest, and therefore the most logical point of approach. Eli put his right hand out. Rex looked down at the hand, looked at the boy's face, looked up at Cole over the boy's head, 1 fraction of a second, a single exchange beat of something that didn't need words. Then he reached down and took Eli Harper's hand in his and shook it with the gravity of a man accepting a formal agreement, because that was exactly what it was. Nobody said anything. The snow fell and nobody said anything, and it was enough. The drive down took 40 minutes in the state police vehicle that Marcia signed for transport. Cole sat in the back with Eli, and 10 minutes out from the lodge, the boy fell asleep against his arm with the absolute completeness of a child who has spent everything he had and reached the place where sleep takes what it's owed, regardless of conditions. Cole did not move for 40 minutes. He sat in the dark of the back seat with the radio crackling softly and the snow moving past the windows and the weight of Eli Harper against his arm. Specific, warm, real, and he did not try to name what he was feeling, because some things are more accurately felt than named, and this was one of them. County Hospital at 4:10 in the morning had the quality that hospitals always have in the deepest part of the night, fluorescent and quiet, and running on the energy of people and machines that don't stop, that have made a structural commitment to continuity that the rest of the world hasn't. Cole carried Eli through the main entrance. The boy hadn't woken during the transfer from the vehicle, and Cole told himself this was practical, which it was, and didn't examine the other reasons it mattered to him to be the one carrying Caleb Harper's son through a hospital door at 4 in the morning, Because some things you look at directly and some things you let be peripheral. A nurse named Deborah Strain, 40-something, with the face of someone who had been on consecutive shifts and had made peace with that being the current condition of her life, directed them to the ICU with the no-ceremony kindness of people whose compassion has been used hard and is still operational. Lena Harper was at the end of the hall. Cole set Eli down outside the window. The boy stood at the glass and looked at his mother, the monitors, the ventilation assist, the IV line, the color of a face that was better than the motel. That was the first thing Cole registered, and the most important thing. The color was better. Eli's breath fogged the window in small clouds that appeared and disappeared in quick succession. "I brought soup, Mom," he said. So quietly it was almost nothing. So quietly it was everything. Deborah appeared at Cole's elbow. "She's stable. Low professional informational. The ventilation assist is precautionary. Her oxygen levels have been improving since she came in. The attending thinks she can move to standard care in 6 to 8 hours if the trend continues." She looked at Eli at the window. She was asking about her son before the sedation. "What did you tell her?" Cole asked. "I told her he was safe." Deborah looked at the boy's hands pressing against the glass. Now it's true. Cole stood there for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and sent a message to Evelyn Hart Hospital. "Both safe. Marsh has Hargett building on Strom," and received back in under a minute. A reply that was 3 words, witness statements, 24 hours. He sent back 2, "You'll have them." She did not reply again, which from Hart was the functional equivalent of a handshake. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at the window. Eli had both hands on the glass now, palms flat, the way children touch things they cannot reach through. The hospital bracelet slid down his wrist, with the motion the white plastic catching the hallway light. Cole stood in the corridor of the ICU at 4:30 in the morning and did not look away from it. Dax appeared beside him the way Dax always appeared present, where he had not been a moment before, without the intervening distance making itself known. He had 2 paper cups of machine coffee from the floor's waiting room. He handed one to Cole without a word, which was the entire language of 15 years compressed into a single gesture. Cole took the coffee. Dax sat in the chair against the wall. After a moment, Cole sat in the other one. They sat in the corridor and drank bad coffee and didn't talk because not talking was the right thing. And Eli stood at his mother's window with his hands on the glass while the monitors kept their rhythm and the machines breathed beside Lena Harper in the patient, indifferent way of machines that don't know what they're sustaining but sustain it anyway. After a while, Dax said, "He's got his father's hands." Cole looked at Eli's hands on the glass, the shape of them, the spread of the fingers. "Yeah," he said, "he does." They didn't say anything else for a long time. At 6:47 in the morning, as the Wyoming winter light began doing something gray and tentative with the windows at the end of the hall, not yet dawn, not night anymore, the provisional quality of light that hasn't committed yet. Lena Harper opened her eyes. Eli saw it before the monitors registered any change. He was looking at her face when it happened, and he made a sound. One sound, not a word, not quite a cry. Something beneath both of those things. The sound of a system releasing something. It has been holding past its capacity. The sound a body makes when it is finally allowed to put down what it has been carrying. Cole heard it from his chair and felt it move through him like current. He stood up. Through the window, Lena's eyes found Eli. The monitors registered the change immediately, heart rate, blood pressure. The machines acknowledging that something they needed had arrived. She lifted her right hand from the bed with the visible effort of someone working against the weight of tubes and fatigue and 3 weeks of illness that had been trying to take everything she had. Lifted it slowly, placed it against the glass from the inside. Eli put his palm against hers, the glass between them. Neither of them moved. Cole turned and walked down the corridor. Not because he couldn't bear to watch, because it was theirs, and watching it would be taking something that didn't belong to him, and he had taken enough from the Harper family already without meaning to, and was not going to take this. He found the waiting room at the end of the hall. sat in a plastic chair, looked at the gray morning coming through the window. Rex Tolan came in 10 minutes later and sat across from him and said without preamble, the way Rex always said things, Hargett's in county lockup under a state hold. Marsh called it in at 5 this morning. Cobb can't touch it. Strome's attorney was at Maple Ridge until 4 and left for Cheyenne. Hart filed with the state prosecutor's office at 6. He looked at his hands. Cobb's insulated, but not indefinitely. Could take weeks to work through to him. It'll take what it takes, Cole said. Rex looked at him. You okay? Cole considered the question the way it deserved to be considered, as something that required a real answer rather than a functional one. I kept the promise, he said. Late, but I kept it. Rex looked at the window, the gray light. Caleb would have... Don't, Cole said. Not hard, just final. Let it be what it is. Rex nodded. Let it be what it was. At 9:45, the attending physician moved Lena Harper from ICU to standard care. The ventilation assist came off, her oxygen held at 94% on room air. The attending used the word encouraging in the tone doctors use for things they are genuinely relieved about rather than professionally obligated to communicate. Cole walked to the room. Lena was sitting up slightly in the bed, elevated by the adjustable frame, with Eli asleep in the chair beside her, his head resting on the mattress near her hand. She had been awake for a while. He could tell by the quality of her eyes when she looked at him, present, processing, seeing him correctly, rather than through the fever's distortion. You look terrible, she said. Long night, he said. Sit down before you fall down. He sat in the chair on the other side of the bed and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment. The floor was the institutional linoleum of hospital rooms, everywhere beige and scuffed and indifferent to the weight of whatever was being felt above it. I'm sorry, he said. For the years, I should have found you sooner. I had reasons. They weren't good enough. Cole, she said. He looked up. Caleb told me you would come when it mattered. He said it might be late. Something crossed her face that was not quite a smile, but was its close relative, the expression of a woman reporting something she had decided to believe even when it was hard to. He said that was how you worked. He wasn't angry about it. He knew you. She looked at Eli's sleeping face, at the way his head rested against the mattress, with the absolute surrendered weight of a child who has finally stopped holding things up. He was right about you. Cole looked at the window, the yellow morning tentative and provisional, the kind of light that has survived the night and isn't yet sure what to do with that survival. He didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would be adequate. And he had learned at some cost, across some years, that adequacy was not always the point. Sometimes you sat in the thing and let it be what it was. After a moment, Lena said, "Thank you for bringing him back." "He found me," Cole said. "I just followed." She was quiet for a moment. Then he walked half a mile in that storm. Yeah. In canvas shoes. Yeah. She looked at her son. He's like his father, she said. He decides something, and then it's decided. Cole looked at Eli, too, at the shape of the boy's hands resting on the mattress, the hospital bracelet loose on his small wrist, at the face that carried, even in sleep, something of the man Cole had buried. Yeah, he said. He is. At 11 o'clock, Donna Briggs came through the hospital entrance, carrying a covered pot that she held in both hands, with the care of someone transporting something that matters. She had heard from a trucker who had heard from a state trooper, which was how information moved in Black Hollow, and she had come because there was nothing else to do when you had heard, and you had a pot of chicken soup that had been going since 6 the previous evening. She set the pot on the bedside table. She looked at Eli, who had woken when she came in and was now sitting upright in the chair with his mother's hand in both of his. Donna opened her mouth and then didn't say anything for a moment, because there are situations where you look at what's in front of you and understand that the thing you are going to say is not adequate to the thing you're looking at. Eli let go of his mother's hand. He reached into the pocket of his gray hoodie, the oversized one, the one he'd been wearing since midnight, The one that had been through half a mile of blizzard in a county cruiser and a mountain lodge, and 40 miles of mountain descent and a hospital corridor. And he produced, with the solemnity of a child performing an important transaction, $1.37. Quarters, dimes, nickels, the Lincoln penny face up. He set them on the bedside table beside the soup pot. "Not for me," he said. Donna looked at the coins, looked at the boy, looked at the coins again. She pressed her mouth together in the expression of a woman who has decided she is permitted to feel this one, who has decided that after 19 years of late nights in Black Hollow, and all the things she had seen in those late nights, this particular thing has earned its response. She picked up the coins and closed her hand around them. "I'll hold on to these," she said. Her voice was even, almost, "for the next kid who walks in from the cold." Eli nodded once. The nod of someone who had known that was the right answer and had simply been waiting for someone to give it. Lena from the bed was watching her son with the exhausted, bottomless attention of a mother who has been separated from her child by fear and illness, and the deliberate machinery of people who saw a family's vulnerability as a resource. She reached out and put her hand on Eli's hair, and he leaned into it the way children lean into their mother's hand when they have been frightened for long enough that the touch of it is something they have to remember how to receive. Cole set his business card on the bedside table. Plain white, his name and number, nothing else. "Anything you need," he said. "Either of you. That number works." Eli looked at the card, looked at Cole. "Are you going to come back?" Cole thought about it, turned it over honestly the way the question deserved. The 7 years and the broken promise and the road between here and there and all the miles still ahead of him and behind him and the nature of a yes that he was going to have to mean for the rest of his life. "Yeah," he said, "I'm going to come back." Eli picked up the card and held it with both hands. "My dad talked about you," he said. "Your dad was one of the best men I ever knew." Eli was quiet for a moment, then, "I know." A pause. "He talked about you the same way." Cole stood at the door for a moment. He looked at Eli, at the card in both the boys' hands, at Lena with her hand resting now on the blanket, watching him with eyes that had made peace with something, and were showing him that peace without demanding anything in return. At the morning light coming through the window, which had made its decision and gone from gray to something approaching yellow, the tentative, imperfect yellow of a Wyoming February morning that has survived the night and is beginning slowly to consider what comes next. He walked out, the hospital corridor, his boots on the tile, the distant sound of a cart being wheeled somewhere, the smell of the place that never fully left regardless of the time of day. He walked through the main entrance and out onto the steps, and the cold received him clean air. Now still the storm having spent itself somewhere in the mountain dark and moved on. Because storms don't stay, they don't care about outcomes. They go where the wind goes and leave the world to deal with what they've left behind. The parking lot, 22 motorcycles covered in road salt and the dried residue of 40 miles of mountain ice. Every one of them would need a full day of work before they were ready for the road again. None of them were getting that today. Today there were still witness statements to give, depositions to sit through, Dax coordinating with Hart's contact at the prosecutor's office, Boone filing the audio recordings through a chain of custody that Strome's attorney couldn't challenge. But that was later. That was the ongoing cost of what tonight had set in motion. Right now there was only this parking lot and this light and these 22 machines and the men standing beside them. Rex was at the bottom of the steps. He held out the helmet without looking at him, which was the gesture of 15 years given in a single motion, the language of a person who has been beside you through enough of the particular kind of thing that doesn't get easier but becomes more possible. Cole took it, pulled it on, walked to the Road King and threw a leg over and settled into the geometry of it, the weight, the width, the way it received him, the fit of a thing he had spent enough years inside that it had stopped being separate from him in any way that mattered. He turned the key. The engine came alive. That sound, that deep American heartbeat that was also a warning, And also in this parking lot, at this hour, in this cold, in this light, after the longest night in recent memory, the closest thing to the opposite of alone that Cole Raines knew how to name. Around him, one by one, 21 other engines answered. He pulled out of the lot and onto the highway heading south, and the formation fell in behind him, and the sound of it went out across Black Hollow in all directions, across the diner and the Broken Cross, and the one gas station and the motel that should have been condemned a decade ago. Like something said that cannot be unsaid, like a promise that had been broken and repaired and tested across 40 miles of mountain dark and had held. On the third floor of County Hospital, Eli Harper stood at the window of room 314 with Cole's business card held in both hands and watched the motorcycles grow smaller on the highway until the sound of them was only a trace in the still air, and then nothing at all. And the silence that came after them was the kind of silence that holds an echo for a moment before letting it go. He looked at the card, put it in the pocket of his gray hoodie, went back to the chair beside his mother's bed, took her hand, looked at the window where the yellow morning was doing what it could with what it had. And in the closed fist of Donna Briggs behind the counter of Black Hollow Diner, 11 miles south on a highway that was dry now and cold and clear, $1.37 waited in the particular dark of a clenched hand for the next child who would come in from the cold with everything they had and nothing to spare.